Hello, my name is Carla Myers, and this is my children's chapter book entitled Spisters. It is December, the year is 2010. It is raining behind me outside, so if you hear some wind or rain, that's what that is, all right? But here it is, Spisters. Enjoy. Chapter 1, The Adventure Begins. Sally was smart and strong, sometimes too smart and strong for her own good. That's what got her into timeout for the bazillion millionth time. Sally hated being sent to her room in timeout at any time of day, but afternoon was her favorite time to catch the rainbows that came through the cut glass in the French doors that led to the backyard. She had just started playing her newly made-up game of Catch a Rainbow on Your Nose when Wrinkle gave her the look. She knew she was right about letting the dog out. Her mom obviously wasn't in tune with the canine world, or she wouldn't have kept telling Sally no, when it was perfectly obvious that their Shar-Pei named Wrinkle needed to go outside. And when that thing came on Sally, that "I'm right, I know it" thing, Sally couldn't help herself. So she disobeyed Mom and let the dog out. Mom calls it testing, which begins with a loud Sally Diane Morris and an 8-minute retreat to the timeout chair in the corner. Of course, Sally resists. The "I'm right" part of her gets mad and screams, which increases the timeout sentence to 20 minutes or more in her room, and usually involves high-pitched screaming and kicking something. You'd think Sally would learn, she heard Auntie say, again. This pattern had been going on for the better part of Sally's 8 years on the planet. It had started in her first house in San Clemente, California, and had followed her to this house in Laguna Hills last year. Actually, Sally couldn't remember a time when the "I'm right" part of her had ever won outright. It usually won later, after the adults disagreed and twisted things around in their heads. Adults do that a lot. Think, figure, plan. It makes them grumpy. If they'd just let the "I'm right" part of Sally be right first, for once, it would all work out. These thoughts tumbled around in Sally's head as she hurled the stuffed animals from her bed onto the floor. Then she punched her mattress violently. "I'm right, I'm right, I'm right." The beat of the mantra consumed her, and she went with it, floating off to a world where everyone knew she was right and honored her for it. The kitties in that world licked her toes and rubbed against her legs, approving of her every breath. The doggies obeyed her, and there were no sisters or moms or aunties, only Daddy, teaching her to sneak and barter and win. If only Daddy were home from work right now. Sally followed her imagination into the "I'm right" land, where Daddy commended Sally for her great ability to understand Wrinkle and gave her a big hug for being so smart. A knock at the door drug Sally from her "I'm right" land back to reality. Mom was babbling something about taking sick sisters to speech therapy right now, and that Auntie is here, and that Sally had 12 more minutes of imprisonment. Sally didn't hear Mom's "I love you." She was too busy feeding angry thoughts to her "I'm right" part. After the garage door shut, Sally leaned on her door and listened. She'd discovered that in this new house, which was much smaller than her old one, she could hear all the way to the kitchen if she was still enough. She didn't even need to employ sneaking strategies to hear the adults. Her silence quickly rewarded her, and she heard chopping from the kitchen. Auntie was probably cutting the yellow peppers that Mom slipped into her homemade mac and cheese. Sally hoped Auntie would save her a slice of pepper, like Mom usually did. A few minutes before Sally's testing episode, she and her big sister Alex had finished helping Auntie put up yellow and orange streamers for Rinnie's birthday dinner. They'd even sprinkled confetti on the table, taped a huge 6 on the wall, and wrapped Rinnie's special eating chair with ribbons. Rinnie was Sally's younger sister, who had Williams syndrome, a condition that meant she needed extra help and that Mom got to park in the blue handicap spots when she drove places with Rinnie. Sally was a little jealous that Rinnie had a cool eating chair with red cushions. That was kind of like a high chair but for special needs people, and a fun fuchsia transport chair with wheels on it. Rinnie needed to go in for open heart surgery very soon. This would be her 3rd heart surgery in 6 years. The doctors needed to replace some heart valve they'd put in 4 years ago that Rinnie had outgrown. Sally didn't really understand it all. She just knew that Rinnie was special needs and stole all the attention and love from every adult she knew. The thought of Rennie getting all the attention tonight made Sally seethe with anger. No one ever gives me attention, she thought. Sally couldn't stand being in her house anymore. She had to get out. The smart part of her jumped into action and started planning. She would climb out her window and down the twisty tree and then sneak around the side of the house through the gate to the front. Fortunately, her room was in the back and the kitchen was in the front, so Auntie wouldn't hear if she made a creak or a peep. And hopefully Wrinkle was asleep in the upstairs hall and not in his favorite spot by the French doors, where he'd see her and give her escape away with his wild wagging. Sally had been practicing climbing out her window for several weeks now and could do it almost silently. At first it was scary to be so high up on the second floor, but the patio awning under her window was made of flat wood slats, so she could walk across it to the twisty tree in the backyard and then climb down to the ground. Auntie had told her that the awning was just like the one Daddy used to climb on when he was a boy. That had given Sally the idea in the first place, and the courage to practice and get good at it. Hadn't Auntie just been telling her about an old movie she'd seen where a man with a funny accent went on a walkabout? Auntie said that a walkabout was a short journey or adventure that Aboriginal people in Australia took to discover the world around them. That was exactly what Sally needed right now, an adventure. The smart part of Sally was on a roll now, coming up with even more good ideas. She looked around the room and spotted her ballet bag lying on the floor next to the bunk bed ladder. She pulled out her tights, leotard, and shoes and dumped in the 4 silver dollars from her tooth fairy box. She thought about taking Alex's tooth fairy money too, but decided not to. She knew it wasn't right to steal, not even from your own sister. So she borrowed Alex's pink sunglasses instead. Sally flung the closet open and put on her Batman boots from last Halloween. It was a little hot for boots in June, but the rest of Sally's shoes were downstairs in the hall closet. So it was boots, ballet slippers, or plastic princess heels from the costume trunk. The boots were the best choice for a walkabout. She looked at her outfit in the full-length mirror. Black boots, turquoise shorts, and matching tank top with a big white kitty face on it, and pink sunglasses. Yep, she looked good. She grabbed a headband with a pink bow from the drawer to complete the look, and keep her long brown hair out of her eyes. The window was open, and Sally had pushed away the screen and slipped one leg out when she remembered Rafa, her stuffed kitty. She dropped the bag onto the wood slats and climbed back into her room to dig through the pile of stuffed animals she'd thrown on the floor. Where was he? She couldn't go on a walkabout without her favorite kitty. Rafa was her best friend on the days Alex was being bossy, and her bed buddy every night. She couldn't sleep without him. Sally found him pouting under Princess Kitty's tail. He perked up and purred happily in her imagination as she stuffed him into her shirt and shimmied out the window. Sally leaned against the hot stucco wall on the side of the house, catching her breath. Batman boots are not the best for climbing down trees. If it weren't for the ballet bag, Sally would have descended head first to the ground and would have probably been on an adventure to the hospital with a concussion right now, instead of on her walkabout. Fortunately, after she'd stuffed Rafa and the sunglasses into the bag, she'd flung it over her left shoulder and under her right arm. On the climb down the twisty tree, her boots slipped, and Sally found herself hanging upside down by the ballet strap, which had caught itself on a sawed-off branch. Being upside down in a tree is a lot different than being upside down in Daddy's arms. But Sally's acrobatic self kicked in and helped her get right side up and down the tree without falling on her head. Crouching behind the tree, Sally glanced through the French doors before tiptoeing across the grass and around the corner. No sign of Wrinkle or Auntie anywhere in the back of the house. Just the rainbows shining through the cut glass onto the furniture. Now, as she stood leaning against the side of the house, her heart was pounding loudly in her ears. If it didn't stop making so much noise, Auntie would hear her and interrupt her adventure before it ever began, probably making her go back to her room forever. Sally breathed deep, like she'd learned from Wee Fit, and soon her heartbeat was back in her chest instead of her ears. She listened carefully as she slipped through the gate and peeked around the corner of the house. Nothing. Not a sound, not a stir, and thankfully no Wrinkle barking. He was probably in the kitchen begging for food from Auntie, or upstairs sleeping. Sally had to be very sneaky, or else Wrinkle would hear her and give her escape away with his wagging and barking. Carefully, Sally tiptoed over the concrete driveway and crouched behind Auntie's gold car, parked along the curb in front of the house. Sally felt like she could still be seen and needed a better hiding place. Looking both ways for oncoming traffic before sliding around the car to the driver's side, she was convinced she was now properly hidden from anyone looking out the window. Peeking through the smudgy windows of the car and peering at the house, Sally noticed the kitchen window next to the front door was open. Had Auntie heard her breathing? Sally thought Auntie was still at the sink, even though she couldn't see anything in the window because the sun was in her eyes. Was Auntie looking out? Sally froze in fear and had to remind herself to breathe. Sally wished now that she'd changed out of her bright turquoise outfit into something more invisible. Oh well, it was too late now. If she snuck perfectly, she could cross the street behind her and hide in the bushes around the wooden sign for the Knotty Pine Park. While she was running across the street, after looking both ways, of course, Sally thought she heard the familiar squeak of her front door opening. Once she was hidden in the bushes, she peeked back toward the house. The front door was closed just like it had been, but something didn't feel right. Where was Auntie? She's probably getting the cheese from the fridge, Sally told herself, imagining the mac and cheese almost ready to bake. At least her hiding place gave her time to think about her next move. Where do you go on a walkabout in California? Sally didn't think there was any place like the Australian outback in Orange County. Sally almost laughed out loud at her next thought. She had gone through her own outback. She went out her window in the back of her house. Suppressing an erupting giggle, Sally made a note of that joke to tell her grandparents, Papa Man and Nana Gigi. They always appreciated her sense of humor. Oh, she just remembered that the Morris girls were supposed to go visit their grandparents in Oregon very soon, like in 4 or 5 days. The girls in Sally's family had made the 14-hour car trek from Southern California to Southern Oregon every summer since Sally was 2. But this year was going to be different. Mommy and Rennie weren't coming this trip because of the heart surgery Rennie was scheduled for. Rennie needed time to recover, whatever that meant. The thought of Rennie having Mom all to herself made Sally very grumpy. She kicked the dirt, which joggled the thought in her brain. Auntie was going to drive Alex and Sally up to Ashland, where on her way to Portland for some art thing she was doing, and drop them off, alone, all by themselves, to spend 2 glorious weeks with the cats, and Papa Man and Nana Gigi in Oregon. Memories of Ralph and Salsa's feline antics filled Sally's head. And then it hit her. Sally knew exactly where to go on her walkabout, to the crazy cat lady's house. Oh, that was perfect! Kids at school often talked about the crazy cat lady, whose backyard was almost visible through the chain-link fence from the farthest corner of the playground, and whose cats often meandered within earshot of giggling second graders. Many snacks had been sacrificed by Sally and her best friend Tia last year, trying to entice those cats to come up to the fence for a visit. Word on the playground blacktop was that the crazy cat lady was, well, crazy, and that she had over 37 cats roaming through her property and over her land. Sally had always thought that was redundant. Weren't land and property the same thing? But she loved imagining a life where 37 cats roamed free. And now it was her chance to see it for herself. She dug through the ballet bag, slipped the pink sunglasses on, and bolted out from the bushes, down the path into the park. The park has more hiding places than the street routes, she said out loud. And it's the same distance to school either way. Sally spotted some kids on the playground and headed toward them, never once looking back to see if anyone was behind her.